Joining us on the line right now is Eli Lake, Senior National Security Correspondent for the Daily Beast. Eli, good morning to you.
Good morning to you.
Good day to have you here to talk about the situation in Ukraine, which is getting more tense. And there was a phone call. One hears the phone call was requested by the Russians. President Obama and Vladimir Putin on the phone call, which is described, and you have to sort of decode what these words mean. The phone call was described in diplomatic language as being frank and direct. Tell us what that means.
Frank and direct means that there is still a significant disagreement between Russia and the United States of America.
And so, what do we know about this phone call and what was discussed?
Well, I don't think anybody has any real resolution of exactly what's going on there, right? But here's what I would say. You have a situation where President Obama had a lot of success in bringing Russia into kind of U.S. foreign policy goals as a partner on a number of issues. I mean, the most obvious would be the Iran negotiations, but then, Syria, the view was that you could get the Russians to work with the Assad regime to end the civil war there. And, even stuff like the supply lines for the U.S. war in Afghanistan. So that was all a great amount of success that we had in lots of other phases in terms of foreign policy, and the Obama administration believed that that was in part because we had changed the dynamics of the relationship with Russia. Then Ukraine. And, you could argue, and Ukraine is so bad right now that the two governments don't even agree on the facts of the matter. So that's why you've seen in the last week something that I've reported for the last month, which is that you've got U.S. officials publicly saying, the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO posting photos to his blog and video to his blog that show not only the level of the troop buildup, but also what they're now saying is Russian special operations forces in Ukraine causing these kinds of disturbances and these takeover of government buildings, these pro-Russian rallies and so forth. So you don't even have the two sides agreeing on that, so I would imagine that it was a very tense phone call.
Well, if these pro-Russian forces are in eastern Ukraine outside of Crimea, Eli Lake, and by the way, that's what Samantha Power, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, confirmed over the weekend. Senator John McCain says, at the very least, we should be giving the resistance of the Ukraine government some light weapons. We should be helping to supply them and arm them so they can fight back against these Russian forces. Is there
even giving them some intelligence, right?
Yeah. Well, is there any movement for that?
I had last week, but yes, even just giving them basic information on, who these forces are and where units are out over their border and things like that. And the truth of the matter is that, that Obama's been very hesitant to get the United States too involved, particularly with the interim government in Ukraine. There's going to be an election next month in Ukraine. This is a temporary government. And there are elements in the coalition in this temporary government that are very unsavory.
But in the meantime, with the lack of decision, Russia's just rolling.
Yes, Russia's making its move. We're reacting, and I think that. We don't know what was said in this phone call yet, but I would say that it looks to me that it's the end of the reset. It's the end of the relationship that they tried to have with Russia.
Well, I hope one of the things that was said by our president to Vladimir Putin is that if your jets buzz one of our Navy ships, we will shoot it down. There was a very provocative act the other day involving a Russian jet basically buzzing 12 times a USS Navy destroyer.
Yeah, it reminds you of Top Gun, right?
Yeah, it does. I mean, as a national security guy,
it's extremely serious. It's very provocative.
It's very provocative. Explain why that's such a serious thing.
Well, it's a U.S. Navy destroyer that's in international waters doing routine. This is a way of Russia saying it's a way of sort of saying we don't want your Navy ships there. It's provocative in that sense, and these things can get very, very close. Those sorts of maneuvers in the Cold War were done, and they were largely psychological, but it's significant.
Well, and Putin is a Cold War guy. That's his worldview is informed by his formative years there in the 80s. So it's understandable that he's starting to make these moves again. And it seems like we're not really wanting to engage in it. We keep saying, the 80s are over. This isn't the Cold War, as if by saying it enough time, it's going to make it so.
That is, the United States after the Cold War said, okay, we want to help Russia. We want to be partners with Russia. They worked to bring Russia into the G8. They worked to try to kind of say to respect Russian power. And from our perspective, the collapse of the Soviet Union was a great moment in history. I think it's also a great moment in history from the perspective of many Eastern Europeans and Kazakhs and Georgians and Ukrainians. And from the perspective of Vladimir Putin, who was a former KGB officer in Germany, the collapse of the Soviet Union was like the worst day in recent history. And everything that he's been doing has been trying to restore the glory of that Soviet Union. And until now, we haven't really had presidents. I don't think until now, Obama, but also George W. Bush, you could say, never really recognized that and just kept saying, if we say it over and over again, Russia's a partner, it'll be true.
I want to ask you, as a national security correspondent, your thoughts about the Washington Post and the Guardian winning the Pulitzer for its reporting on the Edward Snowden affair.
Yeah, I'm sure that there was like a regional newspaper that had done a massive, often the Pulitzer goes to like a 5-part series on a local mental institution or hospital or, some very boring kind of public service stuff. But there's no doubt about it. That was the story of the year. And, I salute the reporters for getting that scoop. Did everything that was published from the Snowden dossier count as news versus things that probably harm national security? There's always a balance there. And they, by the way, didn't publish everything they got. That's also true. Is Edward Snowden, the fact that he went to China and then Russia, does that raise a lot of questions as to whether he's a classic whistleblower? Absolutely it does. Were there things that he made available that were really not in the public service, but things like the IP addresses of machines that the NSA was hacking in China that was just beneficial to an American adversary? Yes. But that was the story of the year, hands down. No hating from me. They deserve their Pulitzer.
All right. Thank you very much, Eli Lake.
Eli would have printed that story in a New York minute,
heartbeat.
absolutely, for the Daily Beast.
All
Thanks,
right,
Eli.